Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso, and I am thrilled to announce the launch of my comprehensive plan for Brooklyn. I want to be clear that this document is in direct response to our city's failure to plan, because in New York City, we zone, but we do not plan. Whereas most major cities have a comprehensive plan to guide growth, we do not. Today, that changes in Brooklyn. The need for comprehensive planning has never been more apparent than it is right now. Just last week, we experienced torrential rain that flooded our streets and homes and brought New York City to a standstill. Over the past year, more than 100,000 migrants have arrived here, putting our local government into a tailspin as we struggle to accommodate the needs of our newest residents. These most recent challenges have both highlighted and exacerbated the decades of unpreparedness that have left major holes in our city's physical and social safety net infrastructure. Our city's failure to plan has also created deep inequities across our borough. We see these inequities first and foremost in housing. In Brooklyn, some neighborhoods get away with contributing no new affordable housing, while other neighborhoods do all the work. Between 2010 and 2020, Community District 1, which encompasses Greenpoint and Williamsburg, added 18,500 units of housing, while Community District 18, which encompasses Canarsie, Bergen Beach, Mill Basin, Flatlands, Marine Park, Georgetown, and Mill Island, only added 500 units. Through downzonings, historic districts, and political capital, the neighborhoods that are the wealthiest and most well-resourced are able to keep people out. In other neighborhoods, local electeds and residents are simply refusing to let new affordable housing stock into their communities, and our current process lets them get away with it. Over a 4-year period, Community District 5 constructed and preserved over 12,000 units of affordable housing. In CD 10, that number is a meager 7 units. It is unconscionable that this is happening amid a profound housing crisis. And disparities are not just seen in housing. We see disparities in the fact that between parts of Park Slope and parts of Brownsville, life expectancy can differ by nearly a decade, and median household income varies by as much as $125,000. We see disparities in the fact that Black women are 9.4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related complications than their white counterparts, and the fact that 90% of all childhood lead poisoning cases involve children of color. The patterns of inequities across our borough are easily visible, as are the impacts that they have on residents. These inequities and the poor outcomes that they lead to are not happenstance. They are the direct result of New York City's failure to plan. New York City has a myopic approach to quote-unquote planning that is disjointed across agencies and irreverent to the realities of how people move about and experience the city. For example, the DCP is not the only planning agency in New York City. The Department of Transportation, HPD, Small Business Services, and the Economic Development Corporation, and the mayor's office all do planning work too, but there is very little collaboration, poor information sharing, and no unifying vision or guiding principles. These agencies then use community district and council district boundaries to plan, despite these boundaries having little to do with how people use the city. So when Community Board 10 wants bike lanes, but Community Board 11 doesn't, we end up with 5 bike lanes that stop short at 14th Avenue. It's an entirely arbitrary border that has nothing to do with connectivity, nothing to do with street safety, and everything to do with politics. Piecemeal planning efforts like this are just not functional for a city the size of New York. And the resistance to real long-term comprehensive planning means our city is being shaped around the desires of real estate developers rather than the needs of New Yorkers. We see this clearly in the fact that the vast majority of applications that come out of DCP are private. It's a tacit admission of how our city works and who is running it. Because if zoning is the only mechanism we have right now to plan, the private actors are leading rezoning efforts. The result is a city designed not for the good of the public, but for the gains of the private sector. And because residential space is so much more lucrative than, say, manufacturing space, M districts are eroded and career pathway jobs are limited for those without advanced degrees who speak languages other than English are limited. The same goes for commercial uses, like in downtown Brooklyn, where the city intended for office use, but produced almost all residential units. And in this instance, the planning failure left the city scrambling to catch up because they don't plan for any of the infrastructure or services, like schools, that the influx of new residents require. When it comes to planning, our city falls short, and our communities have taken note. There is a deep-seated community distrust of city-led planning efforts, and I know this all too well. When I represented the 34th Council District, Councilmember Rafael Espinal and I went through a 5-year planning process for Bushwick and the city, with the city. Bushwick residents and stakeholders to address the neighborhood's outdated zoning and create a plan for how to meet residents' need. After all that time, all that work, the city didn't want to accept the Bushwick community plan because it didn't meet the expectations they had. No matter the fact that the city had never communicated what exactly those expectations were until the 11th hour. The whole thing ended up falling apart. And the result, the neighborhood still has the same outdated zoning, plus some deep, well-earned distrust of the city planning process. What it comes down to is the fact that our city's process puts politics and private gain before public good. Just look at the member deference and a council district like the 44th, where 3 applications for new development that would have included permanently affordable housing units have been pulled over the last year alone. Whether it's absorbing new immigrants or preparing New York against floods like last week's, we cannot afford to keep going on this way. Our city has been triaging New Yorkers' needs on a day-to-day basis. It's not sustainable. Apply the slightest bit of pressure, and we have the current situation: strained city services, a humanitarian crisis, and no plan forward. Updates to the zoning code are not a solution. We can tweak chapters here and there, when what we really need is an entirely different book. My comprehensive plan shows us what we could look like. It illustrates a new planning paradigm applied to Brooklyn. What does planning for the public good look like in Brooklyn? Our comprehensive plan balances community needs for housing, healthcare, employment, transportation, infrastructure, and more to ensure every new neighborhood can grow and thrive equitably. It clarifies local needs as well as citywide needs and sets expectations so that each community district plays a role in meeting the needs of the borough. It makes funding recommendations so that government's limited resources can make the greatest impact for those who need it the most. And it recognizes that all urban policy, budget, and land use decisions are inherently interrelated and therefore need a shared vision to guide them. Before we get into my vision for how to solve these inequities, I want to talk about what the plan is and what it is not. The plan is not a substitute for citywide comprehensive planning or for local planning efforts. It is not a rezoning proposal, and it's not something I can implement entirely on my own. What is it then? First and foremost, it is a guide for my land use recommendations and decision-making. It's a vision for equitable growth based on comprehensive analysis of conditions across the borough. It is a plan to address the dual crises of housing and public health through land use, policy, and budgetary recommendations. And last but not least, it is a proposal for a different way to manage the city. It's a model for planning citywide, and it's a chance for New Yorkers to see the planning that's possible, that they deserve, and that they should fight for citywide. The old way of doing things is not working, at least not for everybody. And if we're going to build a Brooklyn for all, this is how we'll do it. I'm not going to walk us through what exactly is in the comp plan, and then we'll go to questions. So I want to thank you for that. So the planning process was presented, was something that we talked about 7 years ago, even longer, and we now have an opportunity in Borough Hall to move it forward. So this is everything we've done. We released a white paper about creating a more equitable land use process in 2016, hosted a summit on reforming New York City's approach to development to improve public engagement with the RPA, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, and a working group formed in 2017. We released Inclusive City, Strategies to Achieve More Equitable and Predictable Land Use in New York City, which recommends citywide comprehensive planning. In 2019, we led the fight alongside then Councilmember Brad Lander to revise the city charter to include comprehensive planning. And then alongside Speaker Corey Johnson, introduced the bill to amend the city charter to require a comprehensive long-term plan. I speak to all this because this is something we've been working on for a long time. We've known it's been a problem, and it was a problem then, and it's still a problem now. So this is the process we took since February of 2022, 1 month after I came into office. These are the folks we worked with. We have an advisory committee. We haven't done this solely on our own. We have existing conditions report that was released originally through public workshops. We were able to really modify the existing conditions to really speak or be seen in a way that can easily be consumed by the general public. We had more public workshops. We had public surveys. We held briefings for stakeholders, the city planning or DCP and the city council. So it's been an extensive amount of work over the last year and a half. So these are the things that you're going to find inside. This document is not a 5-page document. It is a comprehensive plan, and this is us doing the best we can to condense it so that it's as consumable as possible. These are some examples of things you will see in the comprehensive plan. This is a map on existing conditions, related to life expectancy. And this is where we give an example where in Brownsville, the average age is 76 years old, while in Park Slope and Carroll Gardens, the average age is 82.9 years old. And a lot of these conditions, a lot of the reasoning for this is based on the lack of planning and preparing for better health outcomes through planning. Housing unit change, and here you're going to be able to see who's building and who's not, which I think is deeply important. We right now do zoning in our city, not planning, zoning in our city that's hyper-local. So one community district can say that they don't want to build any housing, or one council member can say they don't want to build any housing, completely disregarding borough-wide and citywide needs. And this map is just going to show folks at a larger scale who's doing the work and who's not. Medium household income. This is also important for us. Obviously, there are deep inequities when it comes to income in our city, and in here, it'll be made more apparent through visuals. So these are the goals, objectives, and recommendations. We have 7 goals related to health, housing, environment, active listening, community services, jobs, and accessibility. The 23 objectives towards achieving these goals, and over 200 recommendations organized into 4 categories based on the powers of the borough president. So it's what I can do. I can advocate, I have a budget, I'm able to make recommendations on land use, and I'm able to build through outreach. We have frameworks. The plan outlines the 4 frameworks that apply land use, policy, and budgetary recommendations spatially across the borough. So there are 4 land use frameworks that we applied and we use. And this is how we want to be able to use it. So moving forward in this office, it's going to be very predictable. What I do will be very transparent and to the best of our ability, devoid of all politics. We want to identify community needs, want to find information and data on Brooklyn, and to refine the future of planning in New York City is the ultimate goal. So again, the recommendations will be decision-making and effective immediately. I'll do the best I can to distinguish planning from politics and to articulate priorities to constituents, partners, and outside parties. And we're done. That is our presentation on comprehensive planning. I'm really looking forward to questions and answers. And I'm going to say something in Spanish very quickly. I'm going to do the best I can here. Este momento lo que estamos haciendo en Borough Hall, como el presidente del condado de Brooklyn, en este momento, esta ciudad no hace planificación, lo que hace es zonificación. Nosotros lo que queremos es asegurar que nosotros podemos planear para el futuro de Brooklyn y, si Dios quiera, el futuro de Nueva York. En este momento eso no está pasando y vemos el crisis que existe en este momento. Creemos que mucho, o la parte de esa crisis viene de la falta de una planificación comprehensiva en nuestro condado y en nuestra ciudad. Nosotros queremos enseñar que podemos manejar la ciudad mucho mejor de lo que estamos en este momento con planificación. Y lo que está viendo hoy, ese plan que lo estamos soltando hoy. Esperemos que el público pueda leer ese plan, y si tienen recomendaciones o opiniones, por favor, dejarnos saber y nosotros continuar a asegurar que este plan sea fuerte. Muchas gracias. All right, so now questions. We open it up to the public, and we have our experts here. So I'll be doing the best I can with the limited expertise that I have, but we have folks that are more than ready, willing, and able to answer any questions related to comprehensive planning. So we open it up. Hey,
You said you wanted to keep this process separate from politics, but I have kind of a political question. You talked about how, New York City as a whole has not done this. You mentioned updates to the zoning code are not a solution. What you need is a new book. So we're sort of talking about the City of Yes proposals, right, that sort of put forth a series of zoning, and speaking sort of to the mayor with an alternative vision, perhaps. And I guess I'm curious if you could sort of.
Yeah, so I want to be very clear. The first thing I want to say, when we specifically talked about how we started this, in 2016, the mayor wasn't elected, and the mayor had no idea that he was going to be implementing the City of Yes. So just just want to make sure, like, politically, he put out the City of Yes report before we could put out our report. We could have done this maybe 6 months ago, and maybe that wouldn't have been the case. It is all happenstance. So I want to say that it's just a coincidence that this is coming after the City of Yes. But I will say that the City of Yes specifically speaks to what we call a chapter in our zoning framework, right, that he is modifying, that we actually support for the most part in the work that's happening in the City of Yes. The problem we have is that the City of Yes is a refining of a zoning problem that we have versus a complete rehashing of how we do planning in our city. So again, I think it's a chapter of a book, and we want to modify the entire book, not just the chapter. So that's what we would recommend, is that we take a step back. We already have a modified chapter. Maybe we look at the entire zoning text, have a conversation about comprehensive planning, and then move forward with it in the city. So, but I want to be clear that it's just happenstance, and that's why we have this lead-up conversation, because we want to refrain from making this about the mayor.
I was just wondering how will your office collaborate? You mentioned community boards and kind of how there been some sort of, I don't want to say discord, but like a lack of understanding or collaboration. So how will your office going forward work with these community boards to sort of reach your plans out?
So a part of the problem that we have is the lack of information. These community boards or these communities are very isolated. And when we're talking about zoning changes, they don't understand the value of those zoning changes outside of their immediate area that they represent. Giving them the comprehensive plan really puts things into perspective. To be able to tell Bushwick that we want them to build 8,000 units of housing through a plan, and how that is going to be a meaningful contributor to the greater good, and then they know that in Sheepshead Bay, they've never built any housing over the last 60 years. It just makes it so that there's some tension there. And then we talk about the racial inequities that exist and how black and brown communities are building our way out of this hole exclusively. We get to show now Bay Ridge, Sheepshead Bay, Mill Basin. It's like, look, you have to be a part of the greater good here, and puts things into perspective. This is what people are doing in this city to try to move it to the future, and you have to be a part of that as well. It also, when it comes to member deference, just informing other elected officials. You might be a council member from Williamsburg and Bushwick and not know the realities or the circumstances of what's happening in Coney Island or in Bay Ridge. But now you will have that information. You know the existing conditions of that neighborhood and why they can or cannot build housing, why it is that they don't have enough schools, why it is that the transportation network is broken. You will have that information, and we're hoping that with that, we build equity into the conversations that they're having related to zoning specifically. So we think information is going to be very important, and this is information that folks do not have, that they will now have handy in Brooklyn specifically. You will know exactly the conditions that are happening borough-wide. And I guarantee there are very few council members that know that East New York and Cypress Hills built 12,500 units of affordable housing, and that these other neighborhoods built 7 units of affordable housing. It'll hold maybe that council member that might believe in member deference and might hold that wholly in the city council would say, hey, I'm okay with member deference, but let's not go crazy here and only have 7 units in your community. The next project that comes up, I want to have a more meaningful conversation with you about its potential versus just blanketly and blindly supporting a council member without the information.
Hi, I saw in the report that you mentioned some broad support for bus and bike lanes throughout the borough. I was just curious if you could be a little bit more specific, and especially respond to the mayor rolling back some bus lanes, like on Fordham Road, for example, and how you think that's gonna play into a Flatbush Avenue bus lane. That was proposed and the city hasn't really moved forward with that at all.
So we're also, one of the major points in the comprehensive plan that you guys are gonna see is support for the IBX. There are portions of Brooklyn that have very little transportation access. And an example that I would give for that is there are some neighborhoods that you have to take 2 buses to get to the first train station or to the last stop of a train station. And the IBX can help cure that. We also want to be able to show people that a bus rapid transit can get you from point A to point B faster than you can in a vehicle on the BQE, right? Because this is not about telling people what they need. This is about showing people alternatives to what they traditionally perceive to be the best way to either get around the city, the best way to build housing. It's just information really changes the dynamics. So I would love to show somebody from Mill Basin that we can get a bus network that is protected, that can get you from there to the central business district in Manhattan in half the time as your personal vehicle. And then we're having conversations then about reducing pollution, reducing traffic, expanding our bus network in a more meaningful way. So we really want to show people through this plan that we can build a better city, a more mobile city. So those are things we want to introduce. I think the situation in the Bronx, I'm the Brooklyn Borough President.
Yeah, sorry, you don't have to respond to that, but just how, like, if you're concerned about Flatbush Avenue.
I'm going to make a case to the mayor with data and information, again, devoid of politics, and show him through the comprehensive plan that this is good short-term and long-term for building out more mobility access, access to economic growth through transit as well. And there are transit deserts. We can make them not be transit deserts. So I'm going to make my case. I'm going to do the best I can with information and data. And I'm hoping that he sees that and moves forward with it. So all I can do is advocate on that front. And I will be supporting the bus lane.
We saw in like one community district needs report that I think it was like CV 14 or CV 17 that was opposed to the extension of the 4 train. How do you like respond and deal with community boards that are opposed to transit expansions in their own neighborhoods?
Yeah. You have to look at the transit system as a citywide network. There's no other way around it. The train station and the access to the train is not solely a local community board access issue. It is a citywide infrastructure issue. And we have to start talking about these things citywide. And we're not doing that. And the problem is that we've empowered, naturally, our politics have made it so that the only way we can get things through or stop things is through a very localized and isolated way. If we start opening it up and showing people that this is not about just your neighborhood, it's about the greater good of the city of New York and the borough of Brooklyn, then maybe we could change minds. But we need to have that conversation. Again, I think people have very limited information, have perspectives that are very informed by their lives, and they haven't seen the greater picture. But that's not necessarily the responsibility of local residents either. That's the responsibility of leadership across the board. A mayor, a borough president should be able to look at their entire borough, their entire city, and make decisions that are going to work for us all and benefit the most people. And we're not doing that right now. We're building the city in sections versus looking at the entire city and looking at and thinking about what it can look like in the next 10 to 20 years.
You talked about Mill Basin and a couple of neighborhoods that are not building their fair share of housing. Are there any others that you identified through this report that you think?
So yes, and you can see the housing unit change here. Wherever you see white, mostly white, are places that have, I believe it's, I don't want to say reduced housing, but there are some places in Brooklyn where we lost housing. Not only kept it the same, but we lost housing. But what you see here are places that haven't done their fair share. And Aaron will answer that.
Yellow is lost.
So yellow is lost, there you go.
And are there specific ways that you're going to apply pressure to them to build more now that you have this?
So conversation we've had with developers is that if you are building these neighborhoods that haven't seen their fair share, we could move through this process a lot quicker. When you come into Borough Hall, if your application applies through the principles of the comprehensive plan, you're not gonna spend a lot of time here. We would approve it and move it on to the city council as soon as possible. So we're not gonna, if it all falls in line with the comprehensive plan and you checked off all the boxes, we'll move forward very quickly here.
I'm sorry, have you already had those kinds of conversations with?
We have had those kinds of conversations so far. In here, we're applying these principles on a case-by-case basis, which is what we don't want to do. You know, it's like one, a project comes in through ULERP to our office, and we look at that individually and make a case as to why we wanted to move forward and how we wanted to move forward and things that we think are important. That's not gonna happen anymore. Anybody that wants to come through our office or go through the ULERP process, by the time they get to our office, won't be surprised by anything that we're requesting, because it's all in the comprehensive plan. And if they answer to it, then our meeting should be very short and our process should be very short.
Can you just elaborate on that specifically, like a lot of the stuff that you talked about in the plan is advocacy, like what you would push the administration to do, but obviously you do have a say in the ULERP.
Yeah.
The plan talks about, in the ULERP process, asking for increased density if they're in neighborhoods that have lower output. Is there anything beyond that? Like, I know you mentioned like trees and access to
Yes.
transit, like are there things that a developer could say or that you would push? Can you
Yes,
just-
so this is not solely a housing plan, but like we just want to put in perspective that housing is the largest crisis we have in our city is the lack of housing and the lack of affordable housing. But in here, you will see issues related to accessibility. We have a heat vulnerability index, that's a huge problem in some neighborhoods. We have issues with transit and ADA accessibility, which we've talked about. Health outcomes, primary care physicians, hospitals, and so forth. There are other things that a developer might come to and say, hey, this, through the comprehensive plan, it shows through the existing conditions that this area is devoid of supermarkets. We want to make we want to put in a supermarket in the application because of the comprehensive plan specifically told us it's a food desert. Or there's like very low care for daycare centers are lacking in this area. Maybe that's what we want to do to make sure that we can give care to people. There's this neighborhood that has over capacity when it comes to over enrollment when it comes to schools. They would be able to look at that and say, hey, we want to consider that our building have a school in it to help assist with the seats. There's a lot of things that you're going to be able to look at through the existing conditions that could help refine an application to the city of New York. And in those cases, everything they're doing is comprehensively thought out. So we're not rushing to anything. This is about a 10-year plan. And I give an example in downtown Brooklyn in my speech. Specifically, downtown Brooklyn was supposed to be mostly office space. That was the goal that DCP put forth. Now it's mostly residential space in downtown Brooklyn. But with that, the EIS didn't call for a new school because they expected this to be a bunch of office spaces. And now the city has to scramble to find space to build a school in downtown Brooklyn because there's more residents than not. My comprehensive plan would have been able to showcase that so that we're not scrambling and we're not trying to fill a hole in a non-comprehensive way. So those are the type of things we're looking at. This is not just a housing framework. This is a comprehensive plan. So we're looking at a ton.
So just to reiterate, you said that other elected officials and business developers and community leaders have been on board with what you've presented so far?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. So, but this is going to be the first time that elected officials in Brooklyn are going to have a comprehensive plan. Right now, they might not know the needs of their communities outside of people vocalizing them or their experiences personally being in the community. But we have data that can really help contribute to how they make decisions. And we're hoping they use it. And in these maps that you're going to see, over 100 maps that we have, or about 100 maps that we have, you can come to your own conclusions. What we're saying, we have 200 recommendations. We're going to do everything we can to move those 200 recommendations forward while we're in this office. And that if we accomplish that, in moving forward with all 200 recommendations, that this city will be, or this borough, will be in a much better footing for the next 10 to 20 years. Because we're thinking about it before the crisis comes, not after.
When
But-
are you going to start presenting the plan to the others?
So we've already had conversations with elected officials about it. So every elected official in the borough, well, city council elected officials have seen the plan. We're distributing this to the entire the entire political spectrum in Brooklyn, they will all have it.
They all have it.
So they already have it. So they know the plan exists. This is not a surprise to anyone. This has been something that I've committed to during the campaign, have talked about throughout the years. And again, I think we can change minds through information. And that's what I'm hoping to do here, is show people that there is a better way, and there's a better way through information.
How long would it take to implement, let's say that everyone says, okay, we like all of your ideas, let's put this into action, how long do you think it would take? Is there even a time frame?
That world that you just talked about, it just doesn't exist in New York City. It's just not the way things run. I've never even thought about like everyone executing it, but it would take a zoning-wide effort. It would take a conversation with the city to talk about their zoning text, conversation with DCP. This is not something that you can implement, even if it's all hands on deck, like in a year or two. This is extensive work that you would need to do to prepare the city for the next 10 to 20 years. So I wouldn't be able to say.
And then I have a technical question. In one of the missing data sections, it was talking about acceptance of Medicaid, hospital staffing, and quality. And I was curious what exactly the roadblock to this is, especially with your recent press conference about One Brooklyn Health and talking about those issues. I was just curious, what is the actual barrier to understanding that?
All right. Can you just repeat it one more time though for me?
Yeah, so there was one section talking about missing data on acceptance of Medicaid, hospital staffing, and quality. And I was just wondering, what is the exact roadblock in order to get that information? Just especially with the recent push for changes with One Brooklyn Health.
Yeah, so I don't want to criticize the makeup of it. I guess it is the One Brooklyn network is still run through like a private entity with significant amounts of public support or public funding, and because of that, it has a structure through a board that is more in line with a private hospital than it is a public hospital. And in doing so, we're like looking to obtain information, and it's not as readily available should it have been a public hospital because the public information. So those are the just natural challenges of being able to receive that information. And, we have agencies here that, we're a creature of the state. We have agencies within the city of New York, like the Department of Education, that doesn't need to give us information the way Department of Sanitation does. So it's just the realities and the nature of the makeup of the political structure of the hospital that makes it more difficult for us to get the information we want. But through this effort with the hospitals and One Brooklyn Health, we hope to modify or have a conversation about that structure so that we could get in more information, so that we could support better and make sure that One Brooklyn Health is a system that we can rely on for forever.
Sorry to ask again about Flatbush Avenue, but do you know where the city stands on that bus lane?
We'll follow up. We don't know where they stand on that. We've had conversations related to Atlantic Avenue, to Flatbush Avenue, so we can follow up on it. With the comprehensive plan, it's really going to be like a foundation by which we start advocating and start doing this work. So there's a lot of portions of it, especially on the transportation front, that we're going to have to start working on if we haven't advocated already. But unfortunately, I'm not updated as to the status of the Flatbush Avenue bus lane. So I'm not. So I don't have that information yet.
Just as background on the comprehensive plan, is this the first, as far as you know, the first plan like this that a borough president has ever put forward?
That the city has ever done. So there's never been a comprehensive plan at all in the history of the city of New York.
There was.
Which one? Oh, in the 60s.
There hasn't been a borough-specific.
All right, there you go. So we haven't had a comprehensive plan since 67. 9?
But it wasn't adopted late 60s.
Oh, so it wasn't adopted, yeah, so that's very important. Yeah, so a plan was made, but it wasn't adopted. This is the first one, borough-wide plan. And I'm hoping, I want to do this in partnership with the administration. I want to be very clear. I hope that they see this comprehensive plan, that DCP looks at it and sees its value, if they do see its value, and can implement some changes to how they work and how they plan, and that hopefully we get other borough presidents on board, or maybe the city would want to do this. But when we were doing the revision of the charter, it just really felt like people thought this was like an onerous job that would be impossible to do. And we pulled off something that is pretty amazing. And I want to say that because my staff is absolutely amazing. With the resources and staffing that we have, we put forth together a real comprehensive plan that is deeply meaningful. And we hope to show DCP that this idea that a comprehensive plan would take 20 years to build, and that it would be impossible to do is just not the case. So hopefully it inspires DCP to think about planning in a different way.
And we do believe this is important for the administration from an administrative level, because right now planning happens at the mayoral level and it happens at the council district community board level. But there is no borough lens, and we believe the borough president has a really important role to play here in kind of knitting together all the communities in the borough and kind of advocating to the administration at a slightly more manageable level than the city of High.
Have you talked to other borough presidents about similar initiatives?
Yeah, I had a very good conversation with Mark Levine, and also with Donald Richards and Vanessa Gibson, and they're all looking forward to seeing the comprehensive plan. This has been something that I care deeply about, but they're seeing, development happening in their borough. They're seeing crises happen in their borough, and they want to see if this is if the comprehensive plan affords them an opportunity to do well by their borough. So after we give them this, I think the borough presidents will be meeting soon as a group, and we'll talk about it, and I'm hoping that they see value in it. But we have talked to the borough presidents. Yeah. Are we good? All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Unfortunately, this thing takes a lot of paper to print. We gave it to you guys. I think you guys have it already digitally, but I have one copy if anybody wants to copy. It's way cooler I think it's cooler to read on paper. There you go. Yeah, everything I email. It's the same thing, but yeah. I just like reading on paper. But I appreciate you guys being here very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.